All right, good morning, my friends. It's Wednesday, middle of the week. Cold here, like in the 40s, cold. It's like that. Now, for some of you, you may be all giddy and everything, and there's something terribly wrong with you, probably. Uh, I jest, sort of, but yeah, it's cold. So I have my sweatshirt on. Maybe I'm taking it off later in the day, but for now, it feels really toasty and good. And I have my little heater by my feet because I just hate cold weather. So anyway, is what it is, right? It's going to be a good day, and looking forward to a brand new study today. We're in the book of First Peter, so we're going to rock and roll with that. And I love it when we start a new book. It's just exciting to me to kind of help people kind of be saturated with the writer, the context, the surroundings, the background. I love story. I love history, and so today, really, I just want to have kind of a conversation with you about Peter and where he is and what he's writing to. So Peter wrote two books in the scriptures, First and Second Peter, the letters really, but he was literally a bulwark when it comes to the gospel of Christ. He's somewhere in his mid-60s when he writes this, and he's concerned about all of his believers, the brothers and sisters of the church. The church at this point is 32, 33 years old. It is has migrated to great portions of the world. We don't read much about it. We know that it was in Asia, or in the scriptures rather. We know it was in Asia. We know it was in Europe. Thomas had made his way to India and was working his way up from the southern tip up. And so Peter was centralized more in Rome, where James, who we just looked at, was more centralized in Jerusalem. Peter's in Rome. And so this is where we find the context of everything going on. James spoke of persecution. We just finished that. He spoke of persecution and hard times that were coming as a result of the Jews who were wreaking havoc on the Christians because they saw them as either disenfranchised or disgruntled or completely heretical. And so that was going on there. Peter is going to be preaching about and teaching about persecution for a different reason. Because of Rome itself, and so this is the context. At this writing, Rome is somewhat in shambles. It was burned. You remember? You may have heard the little legend. Rome burned while Nero fiddled. Right? Nero fiddled while Rome burned, and all of that. So in 64, I think it was July of 64 AD. 31 years after Christ had been crucified and resurrected and ascended to heaven, there's some fires that started in Rome. No one can confirm who started those fires. A lot of speculation was that Nero had them set because he was tired of the look of the city, wanted to change it. No better way than to have a little fire, and it happens. But because of the way the streets were narrow and all of the wooden structures, the blaze went out of control. People began to try to put the fires out, and it would be like no sooner than the fires were put out in one area that more started. So it felt more like arson than an accident. In church, I mean, not church history, just history will kind of explain that. But the whole city's on fire. Literally, temples to all of their Roman gods and goddesses were destroyed. So you had a town, a city, the greatest city in the world at that time, in flames. Homes were gone. You had temples were destroyed. Businesses were gone. It was a total catastrophe in that sense. Nero began to feel the heat, who was the Roman emperor during these days, of people trying to accuse him of it because they saw him in the tower watching as Rome burned, and everyone knew him to be a maniac anyway. So in the process of that, Nero decided to blame the Christians and say it was their fault. After all, they had been talking about how the earth would be going up in flames when the Lord returned, and there would be this disaster, and so they thought, well, they're instigating that, they're trying to create that, and so from that accusation that the Christians were the ones who were creating all of the turmoil, Rome turned on them. But obviously, if somebody's looking for a scapegoat, and it's either you're going to believe Nero, or you're going to believe that the Christians did it, and so a lot of people began to believe that it was the Christians, because they're a weird group of people anyway. They had decided to kind of worship within the catacombs. That's kind of like the archways underneath the buildings in the city, and they would celebrate the Lord's Supper. People would hear that and think they're cannibals, right? I mean, so and that began to be fanned into flame, that there's something weird about these people. They cannibalize, so they're eating their own. They're burning our city. All of these issues began to be raised in this whole section. So, in light of all of that, the Christians were being persecuted. One and two, I mean, there were several things that went on. They refused to worship Caesar. They refused to worship anyone but Lord, and so they were seen as outcast, not of the normal ranks. I think we can identify, not nearly in the persecution sense, but of being ostracized. We've been kind of, as Christians today, have been kind of told to stay in a box. We don't trust you. We don't like you. We don't want anything of you. We want you to leave us alone. And so there's that kind of a thing. And then if you make a stand today and a voice about Christ that goes against common thinking, you're going to be ridiculed. You're going to be accosted. So you believe in creation and a 6-day creation. You believe that God created this. Expect ridicule. You value all lives and I don't mean that in a racial sense. I mean from the womb to the tomb, so to speak. You care about those who are in nursing homes and you care about those that are in the womb. You can expect that you're going to be ridiculed and thought to be kind of crazy. And so this is mild compared to what was going on here. But to give you kind of a context of what that felt like, that's what was going on. Now, Peter is at this point the granddaddy, so to speak, of the church, and he is and always has been chief in the major player outside of Christ in the church. Every time you read of the apostles in the scriptures, Peter's name's first. Peter's name's in John. It's always that. There's an inner circle, but Peter's name's always first. Peter's the one in whom Jesus changed his name from Simon to Petros, meaning rock. Meaning, I'm not that he was going to build a church. That's a misfallacy of a lot of theology, but that he was based on the truth of what Peter understood, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. He said, upon that rock, I will build my church. And so it's upon the truths that Peter had embraced. And so he called him, he said, well, that truth is the rock. Peter, you are the pebble. And that's what he means. You are the glue kind of that will hold these things together. And so Peter was prominent. And we all love Peter. If you know much about Peter, you know almost everybody can identify with him. If you're kind of klutzy, then you think Peter. If you spout off at the mouth without thinking, then you think Peter. If you're bold and aggressive leader, then you think Peter, because he was all of those things. There was this humanity about him. And so today what I want to do is just kind of give us a little flavor of some of that. He's, like I say, he's always mentioned first. These men the apostles were set apart. That's what that means. Sent ones. They'd been sent one. They've been set apart to send, to preach the gospel of Christ. And they were witnesses of the living Christ. So these apostles were firsthand, had walked with Jesus for 3 years. James came to Christ late in life. He was his half-brother, Jesus' half-brother, so he saw some events. He didn't follow him around. Paul, though he by being transferred into the third heavens and seeing, I guess, in reverse what took place. He had that understanding, and he knew Christ from how he had spent time with Christ in that heavenly vision. But unlike Peter, who had walked with him, so there was this difference. He was the first witness account. He was there when Christ showed himself up on that mountainside to be God, and that was when there was the transfiguration of what took place there. Peter was there and mesmerized by what he saw. They taught divine truth. That is, that God spoke to them through the Spirit. This is what Peter will tell us. Moved by God, it says, their hand wrote, in a sense. They spoke divine truth. They understood, the Spirit of God had helped them unlock the Old Testament, and as they wrote the New Testament, they were given this holy unction to do so. They were Spirit-filled holy men. They performed miracles, signs, and wonders to accompany those things, to document that what they said was true. And so Peter had performed miracles, and all the apostles had done so. So when the heavenly city appears, when that heaven, the new heaven comes and the foundation is laid, Peter's name will be on one of those foundation stones along with the other apostles. And so Peter was bold enough to be one of the few who really talked back to the Lord when Jesus began to speak and say, "Hey, here's what's going to happen to me." It was Peter who said, "Oh, time out, Lord. No, that's not happening. You're not going to go there. You're not going to die. That's not happening." So here's this rugged fisherman who just was like, "Not on my watch." And that's when the Lord looked at him and said, "I rebuke you, Satan, for you speak not the words of life." And so there's those conversations that took place. Jesus both praised and rebuked him. He was, by all argument, in Jesus' inner circle, potentially his best friend, if it's true to say that Jesus had one. Now, John would say that he was the beloved, right? So he always called John the beloved, but Peter was the leader. And there was no doubt that Peter was the leader of the church. Peter and Andrew were brothers when they first met Jesus. They were in a fishing industry and business with their father John, and they were partners with James and John. So James and John, brothers. Peter and Andrew, brothers. Their dads had a fishing empire, second generation fishermen. So the four of them had this connection of fishing when they met Jesus. And so this is how the story goes of how they met. They met while fishing, and Jesus used that analogy to say, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And so they left everything and they followed Jesus, and that's where we find Peter. It was Jesus who changed his name. I mentioned that to you earlier. This writer has done something that no one on the planet has ever done before. He walked on water, right? Remember, he's in the boat, and they see Jesus out on the boat because Jesus had sent them on ahead and said, "I'll meet you later." Well, they see him walking on the water, and they think it's a ghost. And Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, command me to get on the water and walk to you." And Jesus says, "Come on." Peter gets out of the boat, steps on water. It's solid. You know the story, right? He keeps his eyes on Christ and everything's cool. And then he hears the sound of the waves and all of that. And he looks. And as he looks, his faith, he gets his eyes off Jesus, which is a great principle in life that you and I must always do. Because if we start looking at our circumstances, we're going to sink just as Peter did. But there was that. There was the rebuke that I told you that Jesus had given. I'm not sure anybody else has paid taxes the way Peter did. Jesus questions Peter because they're asking about does your Lord pay taxes? They ask Peter, and so Peter looks at Jesus and goes, "Do we pay taxes?" And he tells him, "You render unto Caesar those things that are Caesar's," and he said, "So that we'll be good citizens. Go, there's a fish out there with a coin in it. Go go get it. So you think this is crazy story. Christ, Jesus can command the fish. How that coin got in there, I don't know. All I know is that all this divine intervention took place. So Peter pulls a fish out of water and there's a coin in it, and he goes and pays taxes. He also affirmed that the whole world may leave you, Jesus, but I will never do that. And that's when Jesus uttered those famous words, Simon Peter, I tell you this, the rooster won't have crowed 3 times before you will have denied me, or will have crowed until you have denied me. And then he looks at him and says, Simon Peter, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, but I prayed. And when you return, strengthen the brethren. So that's like the last conversation that they had together. Remember, before we get to the end of that story, do you remember they're in the garden? Soldiers come for Jesus, and they began to ask Jesus questions. Peter gets a little frustrated, being the bold leader that he is, grabs a knife, cuts off the ear of Malchus. Like he's going to defend Jesus with a knife against the mightiest army in the world, these Roman Praetorian guards. And so Jesus instantly puts the ear back on the guy, and the story goes on. When they led Jesus away, the disciples kind of scattered, weren't sure what was going on. Peter follows Jesus up to the where the trial is going to be, and where they're holding him, and then he's questioned 3 times. Surely you got that Galilean voice. You were with him. 3 times he denied. On the 3rd denial, Luke tells the story, but they all do. But the rooster crows, and the scripture says in Luke that Jesus looks up and catches Peter's eyes. I always get emotional when I think about that, because of the sheer disappointment that Peter must have felt when he saw Jesus, the Holy One, the trusted friend, the one who is true and holy and righteous, and he realized that he had just denied him. It destroyed him. And so, and even after the resurrection, and they were talking about Jesus having come back, Peter was like, let's go see, kind of thing. It was in hope upon hope. And then there was that time when they had gone back to fishing, and Peter just said, I'm done fishing. I'm going fishing. Well, the whole group, because he's a leader, the whole group goes fishing. Same scenario happened at the beginning of his life, where he throws the nets, nothing. He hears a voice, they throw it on the other side. He does. Peter knows who that is. He gets to the shore. They have a breakfast together, a fish that Jesus had prepared, and he says, Peter, take a walk with me. And so they take a walk. And that's that famous story where Jesus looks at Peter. First real kind of encounter, I guess, to talk about the denial. And he looks at Peter and he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, Lord, you know I love you. Walk a little further. He says, Peter, do you love me? Well, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you. And Jesus asks him a 3rd time. Peter looks at him and goes, Lord, you know all things. I mean, you know I'm a screw up. You know I love you. You know all those things. He says, you know I love you. And Jesus looks at him and says, I want you to feed my sheep. There is the fulfillment of the prophecy that Jesus says, when you have returned, that's it. That prophecy was accomplished right there. Now, in typical Peter fashion, he looks around, he sees John kind of off in the distance walking along the beach too, and he goes, well, okay, but what about him, right? I mean, I'm still the coolest, right? And that's when Jesus said, look, what if I want John to stay until I come back? What's that to you, man? I've got your journey, and I want you to do it. And that's the encounter that we have that I leave you with, and it's powerful, really. And we're going to learn a lot from Peter. The book is going to talk to us about so much theology and truth. It's going to talk to us about persecution, how to handle it, how to live in a godless world. And so I'll see you tomorrow as we jump into this book, and I hope you have a great day. Talk to you soon.